My name is Daniel. I'm 46 years old, and I live in a small town called Florence, Alabama. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, spilling my guts like this, but life has a funny way of knocking you sideways when you least expect it. When Dad passed last year, he left me the family house, a solid old place, white paint peeling on the edges, the kind of home that carries the smell of old leather and pipe tobacco no matter how much you clean. It was supposed to be a blessing. Instead, it became the battlefield where my family quietly fell apart. At first, it seemed like Mom just needed a place to land. She was lonely, broken by grief. But when she moved in, she brought someone with her, Randy, the new boyfriend, though calling him that feels too polite. Randy was a charmer on the surface, always ready with a laugh or a beer, but underneath, there was this creeping sense of entitlement. The first signs were small. My dad's old guitar disappeared from its stand. Randy borrowed it to hang in his man cave at his house across town. Then the tools in the shed vanished, piece by piece, until I realized he'd sold them off. I told myself not to overreact. After all, Mom was happy, right? That's what I kept repeating like a mantra. But deep down, a knot was forming in my chest. Because honoring Dad's legacy was never about the bricks and beams, it was about respect. And Randy, well, Randy didn't respect much. I should have seen it coming the moment Randy started talking about renovating the house, but at the time, I was too busy trying to be the good son to notice I was being pushed aside in my own home. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was temporary, that Mom was just leaning on someone because she was lonely. But things kept sliding downhill. Randy started upgrading the house without asking me. He tore out Dad's old workshop to build a home gym, replaced the antique door knobs with shiny modern junk, even painted over the hand-carved trim Dad spent years perfecting. Every time I came over, it felt less like home and more like a stranger's Airbnb. Mom would smile and tell me how great everything looked, how Randy was so handy, and I'd swallow the lump in my throat, nodding along like the dutiful son I was raised to be. But the final straw came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I showed up to check on some storm damage, only to find a for sale sign sitting in the yard. Randy's idea, of course. They were just exploring options, Mom said, voice light as if we were talking about changing the curtains, not selling the home that had been in our family for 3 generations. That was the moment I felt something break inside me. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Randy dropped the bombshell. He'd already accepted an offer on the house, without telling me. I remember standing in that yard, the rain soaking through my jacket, staring at that for sale sign like it was a tombstone. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the heat creeping up my neck. I went inside, where I found Randy in the living room, sprawled out on Dad's old recliner, the one I wasn't even allowed to sit in as a kid. He grinned like he'd just won a prize at the fair, tossing me a casual, "Hey, man," as if everything was perfectly normal. Mom came bustling in from the kitchen, a tray of coffee mugs in hand like we were hosting a brunch instead of dismantling my childhood. She said they'd been thinking about downsizing, that the house was too much work, that it was time to move on. She used words like "we" and "our," like Randy had earned a place in this family, like he'd been here for years instead of just slithering in after Dad was gone. And then Randy dropped the news. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and said they'd gotten an offer already, a good one. Cash. Said the buyer was eager, wanted to close fast. My stomach flipped, and I remember laughing, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised even me. I asked them when they planned to tell me, and Mom just gave me this weary look, like I was making a fuss over something small. That night, I went home to my place, a modest 2-bedroom across town, and sat in the dark, trying to make sense of it all. Every corner of that house had Dad's fingerprints on it. The shelves he built by hand, the garden he tended even when his back was going out, the swing he put up for me when I was 5. It wasn't just a house. It was the story of our family, written in wood and sweat and love. And now it was all being swept away by a man who didn't know a wrench from a hammer. For the next few weeks, I tried to reason with Mom. I reminded her of the memories, of Dad's wishes, of everything we'd lose. She smiled that thin, polite smile, the one people wear when they've already decided to ignore you. And Randy? He kept poking the bear. Told me I was too sentimental, that it's just a house, and maybe it was time for me to cut the cord. I started realizing that Randy didn't just want the house, he wanted to erase Dad's presence from it. Little by little, he was rewriting the story, making himself the center of the picture. And the worst part? Mom let him. Whether it was loneliness or fear or just the need to feel wanted, she chose him over the son who'd been holding her and Dad together for years. I wrestled with it, the guilt, the anger, the helplessness. Part of me wanted to walk away, let them drown in their own mess. But another part of me, the part Dad raised, couldn't let go without a fight. And so I made a decision that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. I called a family meeting. I didn't tell them much ahead of time, just that we needed to sit down and talk. I figured if I gave them too much warning, Randy would come up with some excuse to dodge it, or worse, twist Mom against me before I even got in the door. So that Sunday, I pulled into the driveway around noon, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Randy answered the door with that same smug grin, like he was the king of the castle. He clapped me on the back like we were old friends, said something about football on TV, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from snapping. Mom was in the kitchen, fussing over a casserole, her usual way of deflecting tension. We sat at the dining room table, the same one where Dad taught me to play chess, where birthday cakes were cut, where we spent one too many nights arguing about curfews and grades. And now here we were, pretending to be a family while the floorboards rotted under us. I didn't waste time. I told them how I felt, how the house wasn't just wood and nails to me, how selling it felt like cutting the last tie I had to Dad. I reminded them of all the hours I spent there after Dad died, mowing the lawn, patching the roof, paying bills they didn't even see coming. I said the words slowly, calmly, but inside I was shaking. Mom reached across the table, put her hand on mine, and for a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd gotten through to her. But then Randy leaned back in his chair, arms folded behind his head, and said with a lazy smirk, "You know, Dan, sometimes you just gotta let go. Can't live in the past forever." And that was when something in me snapped. I turned to Mom, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "I want you out. Both of you." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they came out clear, steady. For the first time in months, Randy's grin faltered. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her chest, and the room went still except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. I told them they had 2 weeks. I explained that as the legal owner, I was within my rights to end the arrangement. I told them I'd pay for a mover if that's what it took, but I wanted my house back. Our house. Dad's house. And then I left. I walked out the front door and drove around town for 2 hours, hands trembling on the wheel, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. That night, Mom called, but not to apologize. She called to tell me that if I forced them out, she'd never speak to me again. I barely slept that night. I kept staring at the ceiling, hearing Mom's words echoing in my head. "If you make us leave, I'll never speak to you again." It hit me like a freight train. I'd spent most of my life trying to be the son she could lean on, the one who showed up, fixed things, paid bills, and now one boundary, one line in the sand, and I was the villain. The next morning, my phone blew up with texts. First Mom, then Randy, then, to my surprise, my Aunt June, who I hadn't spoken to in months. Apparently, Mom had been busy painting me as the ungrateful, cold-hearted son who was throwing his poor mother out into the street. Aunt June begged me to reconsider. Said Mom was fragile, that Randy means well, that family is more important than money or property. Funny how none of them had anything to say when Randy was gutting the house, selling Dad's tools, or pocketing cash from God knows where. I kept my replies short. I've made my decision. 2 weeks. That was it. No explanations, no justifications. And then I turned off my phone. For a while, I felt steady, proud, even. I finally stood up for myself. But that feeling didn't last. That night, I drove past the house, watching the lights on in the windows, seeing silhouettes in the living room, Randy sprawled on the couch, Mom pacing with the phone pressed to her ear. My chest tightened. I wanted to bang on the door, shout that I was doing this for us, for Dad, for the history that house carried. But deep down, I knew they weren't going to hear it. And then came the real kicker. A few days later, I got a call from the realtor. Not just any realtor, the one handling the sale. Randy, it turned out, had forged my signature on the agreement. He'd gone behind my back, telling the realtor I was on board and just hard to reach. I remember standing in the middle of my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, hearing those words, and feeling the floor drop out from under me. Betrayal wasn't even a strong enough word. I'd been robbed, not of money, but of trust, of the last shred of connection I thought I still had with my mother. I called Mom immediately. She picked up, voice sweet, like nothing had happened. When I confronted her, she hesitated just long enough to tell me everything I needed to know. She knew. She knew Randy was doing it, and she let him. And that was when the last bit of fight left me. I hung up without another word. That night, I decided it wasn't just about kicking them out anymore. I was going to stop the sale, reclaim the house, and cut them both out of my life, for good. The next morning, I was at the courthouse before they even unlocked the doors. I filed a formal injunction to freeze the sale of the house. The clerk looked at me over her glasses, probably wondering what kind of family mess I was dragging into the legal system. I didn't care. All I could think about was the look on Randy's face when he found out the deal was dead in the water. I also hired a lawyer that same afternoon. I wasn't messing around anymore. His name was Tom, a no-nonsense type from Birmingham, mid-50s, gray hair, and a handshake that could crush stone. I laid out everything. The forged documents, the property rights, the emotional wreckage. Tom listened without interrupting, then leaned back and said calmly, "They're going to fight dirty. You need to be ready for that." He wasn't wrong. By the next day, the messages started pouring in. Mom called first, her voice trembling between pleading and scolding. She begged me to reconsider, told me I was breaking her heart, said I was destroying the family. When that didn't work, Randy texted, and his tone was a lot less sweet. He called me selfish, accused me of kicking a grieving widow out on the street, claimed I was ruining her only chance at happiness. But the most cutting message came late one night, from Mom again. Just a short voicemail. "Your father would be ashamed of you." That one wrecked me. I sat in the dark, holding the phone, feeling like a kid again, like the boy who spent his summers fixing fences and mowing lawns so Dad wouldn't have to. And here I was, being told I was the villain for trying to protect the only piece of Dad I had left. I almost caved. Almost. But then I remembered the day we buried Dad. How Randy had sat 2 rows back, wearing sunglasses at a cloudy graveside, arm draped casually over Mom's shoulder, cracking jokes with the funeral director afterward. And I remembered the look Mom gave me when I raised an eyebrow, half apology, half warning. Even then, the story was already being rewritten. So I didn't fold. I braced myself. What I didn't expect was that Eric, my estranged younger brother, who hadn't been home in years, would suddenly call, saying he wanted to help. When Eric called, I stared at his name on my phone for a full minute before answering. We hadn't spoken in nearly 5 years. He was the one who bailed on family holidays, skipped Dad's funeral, and only sent the occasional birthday text that felt more like an obligation than affection. His voice on the other end was cautious, almost sheepish. He said he'd heard what was happening. Apparently, Mom had called him in tears, and he wanted to help smooth things over. I could almost hear the air quotes in his voice. I should have hung up. I should have told him it was too little, too late. But something in me cracked. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe I just wanted to believe that I wasn't completely alone in this mess. We met at a diner the next day, a small place near the interstate where Dad used to take us for pancakes when we were kids. Eric looked older, thinner, a little rough around the edges. He slid into the booth across from me, ordered coffee, and launched into his speech. He said I was overreacting, that I should think about Mom's happiness, that I was letting old grief turn into bitterness. And then he leaned in and dropped the real reason he was there. He wanted me to back off because, surprise, Randy had offered to cut him in on the house sale. A tidy little bribe wrapped in family guilt. I felt something inside me go ice cold. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just pushed back my chair, left a 20 on the table, and walked out. As I reached the door, Eric called after me. I didn't turn around. Whatever we were as brothers had snapped in that moment, and there was no stitching it back together. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer in my hand, staring out at the dark street, feeling something I hadn't expected, not just anger, but grief. Grief for the family I thought I had, the one I tried so hard to hold together. And then came the moment I hadn't seen coming, a knock on the door. When I opened it, there was Mom, standing on my porch, no Randy in sight. Her eyes were red, her hair disheveled, her hands wringing the strap of her purse like a lifeline. And for the first time in months, her voice trembled, not with anger or disappointment, but with something that sounded a lot like regret. She asked if she could come inside, and then she said she was leaving Randy. I stood frozen in the doorway, my fingers gripping the frame as if letting go might pull the whole house down. Mom's eyes searched mine, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked so small standing there, the woman who had once seemed larger than life to me. Without a word, I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the living room, the room where Dad used to read the paper, where family photos still hung on the walls, though half had been moved or replaced under Randy's renovations. Mom sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders tight, hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl waiting to be scolded. She started slowly, voice shaking. She said she hadn't realized how far things had gone. Said she'd been lonely after Dad died, that Randy made her laugh again, made her feel wanted. She admitted she'd looked the other way when he started changing the house, when he sold Dad's tools, even when he forged the sale papers, because by then, she didn't know how to stop it. And then came the part that hit me the hardest. She said she'd known all along that I was right. She said the night I told them to leave, she lay awake until morning, listening to Randy snore beside her, thinking about all the ways she had let both Dad and me down. And then her voice cracked here, She said she called Eric, not to rally him against me, but because she was scared. Because she knew she was about to lose the only person in the family still trying to hold things together. For the first time in months, the anger inside me softened, not because the damage was undone, but because the person I'd been fighting for was finally standing in front of me. I asked her where Randy was. She hesitated, then said he was at his brother's place, that she'd packed a bag, left a note, and walked out. She didn't know what came next. She didn't have a plan. All she knew was she wanted to come home. Just as I was about to tell her she could stay, my phone buzzed on the table. It was Randy, and his message made my blood run cold. "Nice move, Dan. But you just declared war." I stared at the phone, Randy's message glowing on the screen like a warning flare. For a few seconds, I just sat there, feeling the weight of it sink in. Mom must have seen the change in my face because she leaned forward, her voice small and afraid, asking what was wrong. I showed her the message without a word. She read it, and all the color drained from her face. We both knew Randy wasn't the kind of man to walk away quietly. That night, I locked every door and window in the house. I checked the back gate twice. I lay in bed, fully dressed, listening to every creak of the old wood, every snap of the wind against the shutters. Sleep came in short, restless bursts, the kind where you jolt awake unsure if you heard something or just dreamed it. In the morning, Tom, my lawyer, called. Randy had filed a counterclaim, accusing me of elder abuse, said I was manipulating Mom, threatening her, forcing her out of the house she shared with him. The words didn't just sting, they rattled me to my core. Because that's how betrayal works, isn't it? It's not just the theft or the lies. It's how easily someone can flip the script and make you the villain in your own story. Mom sat across from me at the kitchen table as I read through the paperwork, her hands trembling around a cup of tea. She kept whispering, "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I didn't know it would get like this." And I wanted to believe that. I really, really did. But somewhere deep down, I wondered if a part of her always knew Randy would bring chaos, and just hoped she'd be gone before it blew up. For the next few days, we waited. Every time the phone rang, my stomach twisted. Every knock at the door made my heart race. I saw Randy's truck parked at the end of the street once, engine idling, his silhouette faint through the windshield. He didn't get out. He didn't have to. The message was clear. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take the pressure anymore, there was another unexpected turn. I got a letter in the mail, not an email, not a text, but a real, old-fashioned letter. It was from Randy's ex-wife. She'd heard about what was happening, and she had a few things to share, things that, as she put it, might save your family from the same hell I went through. The letter revealed that Randy had a history of doing this, latching onto widows, draining their finances, and leaving when the well ran dry. I must have read that letter a dozen times, each line hitting harder than the last. Randy's ex-wife, her name was Laura, laid it all out with the kind of raw honesty that can only come from someone who's already walked through the fire. She told me how Randy had charmed her mother after her father's death, moved in within months, and slowly wormed his way into the finances. She described how he'd sold off family heirlooms, drained accounts, even tried to remortgage the house without permission. By the time they figured it out, it was too late. The money was gone, and so was Randy, leaving behind nothing but wreckage. At the bottom of the letter, Laura wrote one final line that stuck with me like a splinter under the skin. "You are not crazy, Daniel. He's done this before, and he will do it again, unless you stop him." I sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of me, Mom sitting across with her hands trembling. For the first time, I saw something shift in her face, not just regret, but a flicker of anger. Maybe it was finally sinking in that the man she thought had rescued her from loneliness was nothing more than a con artist. Together, we went to Tom the next morning. We handed over the letter, gave every detail we had, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't carrying this fight alone. But Randy wasn't about to go quietly. That evening, just as the sun was dipping below the trees, his truck pulled up in front of the house. My heart shot into my throat. I stepped onto the porch, ready for a confrontation, but what I saw froze me in place. Randy wasn't alone. He'd brought two men, big, broad-shouldered, strangers to me, and they climbed out of the truck with slow, deliberate movements. It was the kind of entrance meant to make a point, to remind you just how small you really are. I called the police before Randy even made it up the driveway. My hands were steady, my voice calm, but inside, every nerve was sparking like a live wire. He never made it to the porch. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes, lights flashing, voices raised. Randy's charm cracked under the weight of flashing blue and white, and I watched from the window as they pulled him aside, questioning, searching, finding a knife tucked into his belt. As they led Randy to the car, Mom turned to me with tears streaming down her face and whispered, "He told me if I left, he'd ruin you." I'll never forget that moment. Mom's voice trembling, her face streaked with tears as she whispered those words. "He told me if I left, he'd ruin you." For all the anger, all the heartbreak, all the things we had said and left unsaid, that sentence cracked something wide open between us. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw her not as the woman who had let me down, but as someone who had been just as trapped as I was. The police pulled away with Randy in the back seat, his face pressed to the window, a sneer twisting his mouth even as the flashing lights swallowed him. The two men he'd brought lingered for a few minutes, looking uncertain, and then quietly slipped back into the truck and drove off, leaving behind nothing but the fading smell of cigarette smoke and the memory of the threat they were supposed to deliver. That night, the house felt heavy and silent. Mom sat in the armchair by the window, staring out into the dark like she was waiting for the past to walk back up the driveway. I brought her a blanket, made us both tea, and for the first time in years, we sat together, really sat, without a television or argument between us. She told me stories I hadn't heard in decades, about the early days with Dad, about how she'd been terrified of being alone, about the way grief changes the shape of a person until they don't recognize themselves in the mirror. And I listened, not as a son ticking boxes of forgiveness, but as a man sitting with another human being who had lost their way. The next morning, she packed up what little was left of Randy's things. We loaded them into the back of my truck, drove them across town, and left them on his brother's lawn, a quiet, final punctuation mark at the end of a chapter none of us wanted to reread. The house, in all its scarred, half-renovated mess, was ours again. I didn't expect forgiveness to come overnight. Some wounds take their time. But as we stood on the porch together, watching the sun rise over the trees, I realized something. Sometimes doing the right thing really does mean ending up alone. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you end up with the one person who matters still standing next to you.